So we told you that this edition of the Basu and Godin Notebook would come at some point on Friday. We did not know exactly when. So yeah, we file later than we usually do. So sorry for those who are regulars of our podcast, but we got through this day, Arpon. And so did the 32 teams of the NHL.
Yeah, but most notably, obviously, the Canadians got through this day doing absolutely nothing. They did not do a single thing.
That was our podcast. Thank you very much.
That's it. But it's notable. It's notable that they didn't do something, and it was notable to kind of see how, most of all, Martin St. Louis took it. Like he got really dramatic about it, and like talking about, when I took this job 3 years ago, I knew we were going to a rebuild, and now we're going to a different phase, and this is, and now it's on us to, he says, in any rebuild, you got to flip a needle. Is this the year we flip the needle? I think it is. Yeah. I thought that was maybe a bit rich, maybe a bit much at this point to like.
You haven't made the playoffs yet.
They haven't made the playoffs yet, but to equate that much meaning to it, but it is. You know what I've been thinking about a lot over this week, and just trying to figure out what the Canadians are going to do.
Bourbon?
No.
Okay.
Not bourbon. No. Well, yes, but no. Is that morning skate before the Canadians faced the Panthers a few years ago?
Oh, when he pointed
up to Kent.
Yeah.
When Martin St. Louis gathered the Canadians on the ice, pointed up to Kent, and said he wants you to win tonight for a change, basically. I'm putting that in his mouth, but basically telling his team that for once, your GM wants you to win tonight. And so this whole rebuild, up until now, has kind of had that vibe. Us players and the coach, and you ask Martin, like, who are you closer with? And he immediately said the players, like, no, didn't even think about it.
No.
So you have the coach and the players on one side who are going out and competing and trying to win games. And you have management on the other who up until this season, I should say, not today, has kind of soft been hoping their team loses games. And that year in particular, that was the year, obviously, that the Canadians had the Panthers' first-round pick. They were kind of a bubble playoff team. They wind up going to the Cup final, and the pick winds up being not that great. But as it turns out, it was kind of a snapshot that I thought of as we approached this day, and I think for Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon, that sense that their team has had up until this season, that they're like against them in a way, or that they're not kind of on the same vibe, let's say, had to change. It had to change where your group feels that management is with you. You have same ambitions. You have the same goals. And them leaving the team alone today, I think, accomplished that. And hearing Nick Suzuki talk about it, who's been one of the most vocal guys, Ken Hughes actually acknowledged the conversation that he had with Nick Suzuki during his press conference today, and his instruction to go win games. And then the Canadians went out and won games. But for the first time mentioned a promise he made at the beginning of the season in Mont-Tremblant.
Yeah. He said basically up until now, we've been, it's for the first time since I took over and I took this job, we're not going to start a season and I'm going to have my mind already made up and my plan already laid out. So it's up to you guys to, with your performances, help me dictate what will be our decisions. So go out there and play. And that was the message, right before the season, and it percolated throughout the season. And, when you ask Nick about that, about what Hughes said, and he said, well, I thought of it, and I knew that if we were going to just lose a couple of games right after the break, right after the Four Nations break, we would be living a completely different day today, because that's how close it came.
Yeah.
It's weird to a certain extent that a stretch of 5 games ended up becoming so important in the outcome. Maybe, of course, wins and losses, your spot in the standings, other teams going up and down, it plays a role in all that. And maybe if the deadline date was a week from now, the snapshot would be different. So you have to look with the information you've got. So they made that decision, but it really it could have gone the other way very easily.
Well, I don't think it was the 5 games like themselves. If they played those 5 games and won those 5 games, but remained 6 points out of a playoff spot, let's say at this point, that's what changed the calculus is how the standings played out over the course of those games. And he couldn't say what he said in September at Mont-Tremblant to the team and then have them play themselves to within a point of the playoffs and be literally exactly where management told everyone they wanted the team to be this year, and then turn around and sell guys, and sell guys that are important to the team.
That's why Marty said he was true to his word.
He was true. He kept his word. That's it. And so he couldn't, I think all things being equal, like what you just said, it didn't come down to the 5 games. It came down to that. He had to keep his word. He needed to keep that relationship healthy with his captain, his coach, his key young players. He told them all that if you do this, I will do this. So you can't have them do this and then do something else. So I think that's what it came down to, because honestly, and Kent talked about it, right? He talked about it today. He said, we are far from a finished product. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but I'm not going to sit here and act as if we have built a team that's going to be a consistent winner and consistently competing for the Stanley Cup year after year. We haven't done that, and there's a lot of work to do. And when he was asked directly about the Kirby Dach injury and why didn't you replace that, there are things that Canadians want to accomplish this offseason. But under the circumstances, what a player like David Savard or Yoel Armia or maybe even Christian Dvorak, what they would have brought to the Canadians was valuable, because it was a seller's market. They probably could have gotten similarly high prices for one or maybe even 2 of those guys if they so chose, but it wasn't as valuable as management keeping their word.
Yeah, and the other part of that is that I think that we get the sense that they're after a big player, like a significant acquisition in the coming months. And I think that a key portion of what happened now is, does he think that he's got enough assets in order to fetch that big fish? And if Hughes in a few months ends up saying, you know what, I could have had a 2nd round pick for David Savard, and if only I had that 2nd round pick, if one of the assets he could have gotten today and didn't get ends up being the difference between getting that player and not getting it,
right?
To me, that's where there might be not resentment, but certainly afterthoughts about going through all that process. But I think now listening to him today, I feel as though he thinks that they've got enough assets as it is. He says, we've got good players, we've got good prospects, and we have high draft picks. Obviously, he would not name any names, but I think the Canadians are comfortable enough with what they've got to sell that in the offseason, they can go after that guy who could eventually probably be a replacement for Kirby Dach as 2nd-line center.
Right. And he does have 2 2nd-round picks. I mean, he's got it shouldn't an extra a third 2nd-round pick shouldn't be the difference between getting a player or not, in theory. And frankly, they have the 2 firsts. I think I think the only way Kent wasn't going to keep his word was if he could somehow get that first round pick. And, we were talking about the Evans Armia package. Obviously, that fell apart when Evans basically came down to where the Canadians were comfortable signing him. So that goes away. I don't think a package of any of the other three guys would have brought back a first. And frankly, I don't think even the Evans Armia package, maybe as it turns out, wasn't bringing back a first. At least not.
It's a strange market because unless the Florida Panthers win the Cup, Anthony Beauvillier provided a better return than Brad Marchand today.
Yeah,
so that's the
right.
sort of market that we were dealing with today.
Right. I think they have to win 2 rounds. I think they have to win 2 rounds, and he plays 50% of the games. That was the last.
That's the last.
That's the last version of the conditions that I saw on that deal.
Okay.
But still, I mean, if they get knocked out in the first round, which they could very easily, then Brad Marchand would get the same return as Anthony Beauvillier, which is ridiculous. But Anthony Beauvillier getting a second rounder for the Penguins from the Washington leads me to believe that the Canadiens could have gotten a second rounder for any one of Armia, Savard, and probably even Dvorak to some extent. I mean, he's a top 10 guy in the league in faceoffs. He kills penalties. He does a lot of things that teams value at playoff time. So, I would imagine there was a lot of teeth gnashing in the Canadiens war room in Brossard when they see all these prices, like, oh, we can have that. We can have that so easily. But I think ultimately they did the right thing. Like, if, the real piece of news that came out on deadline day was Kent Hughes revealing that he made this promise at the beginning of the season. No one ever talked about, I'd never heard anyone mention that. That changes the context completely, and that changes the evaluation that they were making of the team. Because frankly, I think to some extent their minds were kind of made up going into the Four Nations break. And we've talked about it. Nick Suzuki referring to falling on our face and all this stuff like that was, and it was interesting when Kent talked about today, I want to see how our players react in this high pressure environment. This environment, we're going to get a lot of information, and that information also has value. It's not, you can't trade that information to go get a player like you can a second round pick. But, we've said it a million times. This was an information gathering season for the Canadiens. And so now they have an opportunity to gather some information on these guys. And it's prioritizing the various things. And what this administration, and Kent said this also at the golf tournament prior to the season, that they weren't going to be single-mindedly focused on asset acquisition. There were other aspects, other elements of their jobs that were going to be prioritized. One of them being, identifying holes and filling holes and targeted acquisitions, and not just blindly picking up players and getting draft picks to take on bad contracts and stuff like that. They were actually going to start building a team here. But another one, I think, is recognizing and nurturing a culture that's building here, and sort of a family environment that the Canadiens seem to have created. And I think
that's that last one is particularly strong. You can feel it.
Well, that's what,
yeah. But today, I mean, the guys were beaming with the notion that the team had been kept intact. Both guys who are not rumored to be traded, and obviously those who stayed. Christian Dvorak is a bit harder to read, but I'll say this though.
Putting it mildly.
I'll say this though. He hasn't had a lot of success personally with the Canadiens, and the Canadiens as a whole has not been successful since he's come over, and he's eager to participate in the playoffs with this team, and I'll take his word on that. But Savard and Armia, there was no doubt about it. Fun moment. So the guys took the ice a few minutes before 1:00 here, Mountain Time. So almost a few minutes before the deadline. And so they were skating in the Saddle Dome, and David Savard ended up being the last player to jump on the ice. And he was welcomed by Jake Evans, who had a little stick tap, and then Savard skated to him, and Evans took his glove off, and they shook hands like very, very formally, but at the same time,
The way Slav used to do it with Monahan.
exactly.
Yeah.
But and I went to see Jake after that. He says, it's just trying to make light of a situation that had been very intense and very, very very tough on certain guys. So and they love Savvy. That's the thing. They just love that guy. And
he's a culture guy.
Yeah,
he's a big time culture guy. Like, I mean, he's still, and I thought you asked a good question to Matheson in Edmonton. I guess that was last night. Man, It feels like ages ago. But just about the skill required to block shots the way he himself does and Savard does. And, there is a skill to it. It's not only courage. It's mainly courage. That's what Matheson said. He pointed to his nether regions in saying that's what you need in terms of being a good shot blocker. But, Savard has excellent technique, and it's a skill that is useful, especially this time of year as goals are going to be more impactful or consequential. And so, but, what he brings off the ice, what he's brought already to like Caden Gooley, to Arbor Jacki, Struble, Lane Hudson speaks in glowing terms about him. Like, he keeps the group loose. He's kind of the funny guy around the team. Like, he's the goof a bit, and like he's got an off-ice presence to him. But, he spoke today. Like, this is the other thing about David Savard. So last year, trade deadline, lots of rumors about David Savard. And
more than this year.
More than this year, yeah. And I think the Canadiens were after a first-round pick, and had they gotten a first-round pick, they would have moved him. They didn't get it. And if you remember last year, first-round picks didn't really move. That's what made the Monahan deal so good, because the Canadiens jumped the market and got one of the only first-round picks to move last year. This year, they're flying around everywhere. But, and he dealt with those rumors. He spoke regularly. This year, the Canadiens decided not to make any of their impending UFAs available to speak to the media until today. So we spoke to Armia today. We spoke to Savard, Dvorak. But he was talking today. What made it unique is that he spoke like a guy who knows that he's gone. Like, that this is it. This is his last run with the Canadiens. And, that whole thing about Martin St. Louis talking about Jake Allen planting a tree knowing that you won't sit in the shade. Like, David Savard was speaking very much in those terms. Like, I would have liked to see the fruits of all the work we put in the last few years. It might not happen. I might not be here anymore. I'm always going to follow these guys. I'm going to be a fan of this team. Like, he was really speaking as a guy and so for him.
Well, the retirement is not far.
No, he'll be 35 in late October of next season. So that's his age 35 season. But it's more significant, right? When this playoff, this winning streak helped him to stay. And now he would be more motivated than ever to hope that he's not playing only 20 games in a Canadiens uniform, that he's playing 24 games or 25 or whatever, however long it takes for the Canadiens to get knocked out in the first round of the playoffs.
Yep.
That would be the added bonus. And just to experience playing in the playoffs in Montreal, which no one has really done on this team, especially, Savard played in the playoffs in Montreal, but in the Tampa Bay Lightning uniform. But no one has experienced what we experienced at Four Nations when that Canada-USA game in the Bell Center. And I think David wants that desperately. And if that's
in a full Bell Center, only Galley did.
Yeah.
So he's the only one.
He's the only one. Exactly. And I thought Nick Suzuki talking about seeing that and wondering what it would be like for him to experience that, not for Team Canada, but for the Canadiens. Like, that was one of his big takeaways from watching that tournament. Yes, he would have loved to have been on Team Canada, but the other thing was watching his home building full of life and energy. And not that there's no energy at Canadiens home games now, but that playoff style energy, really made him hungry too. So, I think I think this group is pretty galvanized to try and prove management right here and prove that they were correct in not touching them and not touching the players that could have been traded. And there might have been other guys that would have been like, I mean, Kent Hughes made a point of mentioning that they were spitballing, that's a quote, spitballing stuff with a lot of teams based on guys that weren't even rumored to be traded just to see if there was a find a way. But that would imply trading guys that we weren't talking about them trading away, you know? So I think there were a lot of things on the table here, but ultimately they decided that for many reasons, but one of them being that this culture is kind of unique and seems different.
But the headline in Montreal seems to have been a lot about Kent Hughes rewarding his players. But I like where you go with the second aspect of it is that now the players still have something. They have to return the favor by the way that they're going to play. Mm-hmm. They have to show that that whole thing was worth it, and that for the guys who thought that they might have gone, and for the rest of the team that basically were crossing their fingers that they would keep the band together. Now it's time to, I wouldn't say put up or shut up, but it's time to prove that that was all worthwhile. And they believe that they've got there's a playoff team there. That's their sentiment. And when you look,
well, the players do.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Right. And
when you look at how things now shape up, I mean, Boston sold a lot.
Yes.
It's the Rangers sold, but they were sort of they went both ways. But so I won't include
really
them.
Buy. I don't know who did.
Well, they
Nicolas, which I think.
Carson Soucy.
Carson Soucy, yeah, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, they ended up replacing Ryan Lindgren, who's falling into pieces
with Soucy,
which is decent, and it's a guy under contract.
Yeah,
it's different format, different type of player, but anyway, so Boston is basically going to be a DNF, did not finish. The Islanders, we can say the same. So basically, and
they kept Kyle Palmieri.
Yeah, okay.
They hope to sign Kyle Palmieri, 35 years old.
That's good, Lou. That's good. So basically, it's there's Ottawa, Detroit, Montreal, and the Rangers are still in it.
Yeah.
But now you'll have to start looking. You'll have to start looking at how much the Devils might fall, because Columbus could take the third spot in the Metro.
Right. Yeah.
So this is a new development, with the Jack Hughes injury. So I wouldn't be surprised. There's still plenty of time for the Devils to go from Stanley Cup contender to a team slightly missing the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to watch. So that's another possibility by which the Canadiens could sneak in. But no matter what happens elsewhere, they'll still need to continue winning games on a regular basis.
Yeah. I checked. Dom Lucian put his projections out after the deadline, adjusting for all the changes that were made, and the Canadiens are at 16% to make the playoffs now, up from 2 coming out of the Four Nations break. So not insignificant, but still 1 percentage point behind the Islanders, despite trading Brock Nelson.
Yeah,
they're at 17% because they still have good players there. They're not a team that's going to win the Stanley Cup anytime soon, and they need to come up with a plan on how to do that. But the players they still have, they're still good players there. There's just not a great team necessarily. And so the Canadiens, that's it. Their odds, they need to still beat the odds. The odds are against them still. But it's going to be fascinating to see the boost that this gives the team. And Nick said something interesting where he thinks this is weighing heavily on some guys, and now they'll maybe be able to play free, and how the team's going to benefit from that. So
I think it was the case. The most glaring example was Jake Evans prior to his contract.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was weighing on Savard's play all that much. I mean, he doesn't need that extra weight.
No. Or what? I'm not touching that. I don't have,
No,
yeah. Well,
that's
I'm
okay.
not, glass houses, stones, all that stuff. Like, I'm not gonna, like,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Who am I to talk?
Yeah, exactly. But, yeah, so, I mean, it's really more than a vote of confidence. I do think there's some recognition to, because the imperfections of the Canadians are quite obvious, and I think they're plain to see. Also, the other development today was Caden Gooley skated for the first time in Brassard. Kent Hughes wouldn't give a timeline on his return and kind of suggested that if the Canadians fall out of the race, he might not play this season, which also suggests that if the Canadians do remain in the race, that he will or might play this season, which would obviously be a huge difference maker for this team and their playoff hopes. But what's interesting is management, more than rewarding, it's recognizing just the level of buy-in that this team has. And I think he credits Martin St. Louis for that a great deal, that he has gotten these guys to buy in. But also just what are they going to learn about these guys? Like he's sort of, by saying like, I'm very eager to watch these 20 games,
Mm-hmm.
Yuri Slavkovsky, like, show me that you can do this for another 20 games. Like, play this way for another 20 games. Nick Suzuki, play this way for another 20 games. All the guys who are going to be here when the tree is fully grown and there's shade to be had.
Yeah.
Those guys need to show management something, and management needs to pull information from how they perform in this environment and act accordingly. I mean, it's
Montembeau's another one during this
sure.
last stretch who is going to be counted on a lot. So I expect him to play a lot. I expect Suzuki to play heavy minutes. I mean, we've been seeing it coincides with the Doc injury, but since they came back, it's not. I mean, Doc was not playing a whole lot, before his injury or just before the break.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of minutes, they hadn't done a good job of keeping Suzuki's minutes down roughly compared to previous years, making sure that he was not playing too often on the PK. This whole rotating the four lines, coming in waves and all that was useful for Suzuki's energy. But lately, it's all 20 minutes, 21 minutes.
Yeah.
I think he reached 22 against the Oilers, but it was his highest time on ice of the season. So the top guys will play a ton, and yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the result is everything. I mean, that's it. Like that's the environment that these guys are in. Case in point, after that game in Edmonton, if you looked at the game against Buffalo at home, where the Canadians played terribly for the final 40 minutes, went to overtime before they beat Buffalo, and blew a 3-goal lead in the process, and then you compare that to the way they played against Edmonton, where they were excellent from start to finish. They played a very strong game. They weren't perfect, but they went toe-to-toe with a team that's struggling right now, but still a very talented team, and played an excellent hockey game. And so I asked Cole Caulfield after the game, and I was like, well, you won against Buffalo, but you probably didn't like the way you played. You lost tonight, but you probably did like you. It's kind of the opposite, right? He's like, well, total deadpan. Well, we won against Buffalo and we lost against the Oilers. So a result is a result. And that's like, he didn't want to entertain any like
process-driven
garbage. You know, like he's like, and plus you won in overtime and you lost in overtime. Like it couldn't be more of a coin flip in the two games. It's just the vagaries of a season where if you just take a little step back and evaluate it, like the win was probably worse than the loss in this case. But that's where these guys their mindsets are is it's going to be totally results driven in the sense that, and we haven't seen Martin St. Louis coach that way until this season. Not completely, at least, but it's there's always been some development based decisions that he's made, And he's quite openly saying, I'm not going to make those decisions anymore. We're not doing that. I'm not playing a guy who's not playing well and who's hurting our chances of winning the game just because he's 21 and I need to play him. I'm going to play the guys that are going to help me win the game. And so that was cemented today.
Yeah. I'm curious in terms of that type of management, or managing the bench. I don't know what awaits Alex Newhook, because he's been playing. He's on a line with a kid who is being asked to. Ideally, he would fill a role that that's too much for him. So basically, he's got Owen Beck's got wingers that scream second line for the Canadians, but in terms of time on ice and his own personal duties, it's the fourth line. But so Newhook's got Beck, who's very green, and he's got Laine also on the other wing, who was out with flu symptoms today, and who has not been very convincing at 5-on-5 for a good chunk of games now.
Mm-hmm.
So that leaves him on, having to prove himself and find a way to make sure that he's going to earn enough minutes, and that he can, despite the tough situation of his own line, that he can stand out nonetheless. So I find that he's in a particular situation.
Yeah. Yes, he is. I would, if the Canadians were worried about next season, this would be a perfect time to put Newhook in the middle and give him his own line to be a center on and see what that looks like, And so that's something they're probably not going to do, frankly. I mean, he takes faceoffs on the left side on his line, and it's not a faceoff thing. It's who's actually playing center, who's skating up the middle of the ice more often than not. But yeah, I think what you said about that line is why I wasn't all that worried about what the Canadians might do to fill that hole or to replace Doc, is that it is essentially the fourth line. And he's not, and Newhook's stuck there because the other three lines, Marty's not going to touch them. There's no chance in hell. Unless someone gets hurt, those lines are set in stone.
Yeah.
And this is the counterbalance to what they're doing right now. This results-based approach doesn't allow you to take a Newhook and tinker with some lines and put him at center and put him with Gallagher and Army again, like he was last season when he played center. And
yeah, but
you could try that, but they're not going to.
But you say they're not going to. He's not going to change those lines. If you want to maximize results, you can also drive up the inner competition and say, dude, you're not really in your game tonight. Let me put Newhook at your place.
Who?
Well, I mean, it could be for Gallagher.
Yeah, but he's not going to do that until they actually give him a reason to.
No, I know, but
that's what I'm saying.
But there's going to be, on any given night, if winning is the priority, well, he might choose to read on who's on their game and who's not.
Yeah.
So that's why Newhook can showcase himself in a way that his old line probably won't be able to, unless Laine comes, wakes up from whatever that is. But
so this is when Laine in the first period in Edmonton got a shot on goal at 5-on-5.
Yeah,
it made me curious, and so I checked how many shots on goal he had at 5-on-5, and he had 28 going into the game this season. So in 33 games, he had 28 5-on-5 shots on goal, 42 on the power play.
And what's his best asset as a player?
It's his shot.
Okay.
So, but you need the puck, and you need it in certain spots on the ice to shoot the puck. And in order for that to happen, you need to do all the other things that are necessary to make that happen. And that's clearly what he doesn't do on a.
He didn't play his worst game, though, against Edmonton.
I thought he was fine.
Yeah.
I thought he was fine against Edmonton, but when it came down to it, and, Knobloch is throwing McDavid, Draisaitl on a loop, rotating them in the third period, Owen Beck didn't play, and Laine couldn't play. I mean, and that was, and I think that's fair. And that's another results-based decision that Marty has to make. So there's all these things that Marty hasn't had to do. And I think it's kind of a valuable learning experience for him as well, right? And he talked about he recently referred to how I'm a young coach, and I think I'll be able to better see a losing skid like the one they had going into the break. Hopefully, I can see it quicker, and we can nip it in the bud quicker because I'm learning. And this is something else that he's going to have to learn is at this time of year, what are the buttons to push? How do I make an in-game adjustment like putting New Hook on the line? How do I recognize that a guy's not going and this can give us a spark? These are playoff type adjustments that are necessary because every game is so important, and you can't just let a guy play through a sleepy game. You gotta act, right? Yeah. And so and let's be honest, Marty's leanings have been pretty consistently towards continuity. Like he really needs something pretty drastic to happen for him to change things up. And so, it'll be interesting to watch him too over these 20 games and see how he adjusts to the environment and to the urgency of each game from here till the end of the season.
I want to go back to a trade that we saw today involving Luke Schenn, who was traded for a second rounder and a fourth rounder. Now Schenn he's a right-handed defensive defenseman, just like David Savard. Mm-hmm. Is not paid as much, and he's under contract for next season. Yeah. So those are important parameters to consider. But when you look at the type of return that the Penguins were able to get for Schenn, do you think that it's apples and oranges to say maybe that under those circumstances the Canadiens could have gotten a second round pick because it was a testament of what the teams were looking for, or the fact that there was that extra year on Schenn's contract made all the difference, and basically you could not measure those two together?
Well, no, I don't think so, because I think there's some teams that would look at that as a bad thing, that extra year on Schenn's contract. I think there are teams that would look at Savard and say that, the fact he's a UFA is good. That's perfect for us. And, it's hard not to get the impression that basically the entire league has written off this draft. Like they don't seem to cherish this crop of players available. The depth of the draft has been criticized. So later round picks, I've heard people say that a late second quality player in this draft would normally be a fourth round pick in a normal draft, those kinds of things. So I'm confident the Canadiens could have gotten a second rounder for David Savard if they so chose. That they could have gotten a second rounder for Armia if they so chose. This was the currency of this trade deadline. This was standard operating procedure. Like, honestly, like, God bless Anthony Beauvillier. Like, I don't. But man, I mean, if that guy he was traded for a fifth round pick just a year ago.
I think it was twice he was traded for a fifth round pick.
And all of a sudden now he's worth a second, and you can't say that he's appreciably better than he was last year now. So yeah, I think Canadiens management just had to take it. They just had to take not being sellers for the first time. And I think there's value in that. I think there is value in that, because when Marty said it would have been really hard to keep this group engaged based on where we are in the standings if we decide to sell again, it's not like previous years where selling was a no-brainer. And it was easy for Marty to be like, okay, well, we got to keep going here. We can't just, we got to sprint to the finish and all the things that he says. He
said today it would have been harder for me to keep them engaged. Keep them engaged.
Yeah.
We talked in a previous episode about the fact that the Utah HC was in a similar situation as the Canadiens. They're roughly at the same place in their build. They had similar player profiles to offer on the market, and they adopted exactly the same situation as the Canadiens, the same position, by retaining their own players instead of trading them, re-signing some of them. That I think that they had 8 players up for contracts and already signed 4 of them. But I mean, Alex Kerfoot could have gone on market. He was probably one of Jake Evans' main comparables, and he was retained for 1 year at $3 million. And again, so there's the parallel continues because not only did they decide to manage things in a similar fashion, but there's also the vibe in both places that there's really this is a place where the teams that are playing for that team they want to stay and they're thinking that they're building an interesting culture. So there's striking similarities between those two teams.
Yeah, and Utah actually traded Shea Weber today.
Yeah. Hall of Famer Shea Weber.
Hall of Famer got traded today, along with Victor Soderstrom, who was a John Jacob pick. 10th overall, if I'm not mistaken. Anyhow,
he was one of the helps for that. That enabled the Canadians to draft Cole Caulfield in number 15.
Right.
So
that was that draft. That was the Vancouver draft. Yeah. Okay, that's right. So quickly here, what's ahead for the Canadians, right? And what in terms of on the ice, what we've seen, because I think that's the other part of it is that. Until that game in Edmonton, there was a gap that management had to, I guess, mull over of the taste in their mouths after watching their team play those final 40 minutes against Buffalo, and then being like, are we really going to invest in? Is this really the team that we're going to leave alone? Is this really the team we're not going to touch? And so, and Kent talked about consistency issues and how that's what he really wants to see over these 20 games. Can this group be consistent? Well, they're playing a team tomorrow. Interestingly, Jakub Dobeš is going to start that game, which kind of goes counter to what you said previously and what I assumed, that they are going to ride Monty, because if they were going to ride Monty would be starting that game because they have a back-to-back coming up, Vancouver, Seattle. Dobeš is going to get one of those games for sure. So it means Dobeš is going to start 2 of the next 3 games.
Yeah.
So it is, but I think, I think they also want Dobeš to kind of find the magic he had before and sort of ride that too. So it's, but yeah, in terms of, Calgary, very similar position, kind of on the fringes of the playoffs, didn't do anything really of consequence. Not today, at least. They did stuff kind of leading up to the trade deadline, and obviously the big trade was weeks ago, the Farabee Frost deal. And Vancouver, who is teetering on the brink of something, but yeah. But speaking of Vancouver, this is what I found interesting is that, like Kent was asked about, were you the least bit tempted to go out and get a rental? And he kind of that's when he talked about, we're not in a position, basically we haven't reached a stage of our development as a team where we would go spend money on or spend assets on big time rentals. But one guy that Vancouver apparently didn't get a whole lot of traction on was Brock Besser.
Oh yeah.
Patrick Allvin came out, basically told the world that the offers he was getting on Brock Besser were just completely insufficient to consider moving him. They haven't signed him to a contract yet. He's an unrestricted free agent, July 1st. And that was a case where I don't know if the Canadians have any interest in Brock Besser, but if they were open to trading him and it took, I don't know what the bar was for them to move him. They probably wanted a first-round pick, I would imagine. But that would have been a case where if you can get him at a certain price, like that would address the second line issue. You move Newhook to the middle.
Yeah.
You put Besser on the second line.
But then can you play Besser and Laine on the same line?
I know. Well, that's it. But that's the kind of thing they could have tried if they got it on a bargain. And I don't think there were no Thomas Vanek bargains from the year that Burge kind of swooped in at the last minute and got Thomas Vanek. That didn't seem to be happening, but that was he was a candidate for something like that. And I don't know what the minimum would have been for Allvin and Rutherford to consider moving him, but for Allvin to come out and say, basically the league didn't step up on Besser, so we kept him. I just can't imagine talking to your player after telling the world that. But B,
Yeah, that's not great for their player team relationship.
right. But ultimately, they were probably smart not to do that. But I was just wondering if there were situations similar to that where a player's value was suddenly being kind of depressed by the market, and if the Canadians could have swooped in and done something inexpensively. But generally, a guy in this market who could play in a top six, or you could consider a top six caliber player, you were not getting for less than a first round pick. I mean, that's kind of, or an equivalent type of prospect.
Yeah, but I just don't see how the Canadians would have considered renting.
Yeah, well, that's it. They wouldn't.
I mean,
But it's largely because of the price. Like, if it was a market where a third round pick could get you something that's actually remotely interesting, I think they might have considered exploring the rental market at the very least. But with the prices set where they were, it was a non-starter. It was basically, there's no way, because they're not, yes, they're just draft picks, but I think they have higher hopes for what they could get with those draft picks.
Yes,
than a rental player.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I didn't hold my breath for a rental at all. I mean, I kept the outside chance that there might be a hockey trade involving players signed long term, but when it came to rentals, I didn't see them. I mean, if a couple of weeks ago the Canadians were still in the mindset that they were ready to sell, going from being a seller to standing pat is already a process, progress or process, as they both apply. But to go from being a seller to a buyer,
well, this is part of that process this year.
But it's again, you have to go beyond the result and also look at the process and look at the way that the team
but I mean, standing pat is part of the process to transition to becoming a buyer.
That's it. That's why they took that step this year, and it was enough. Any fallout or impact for the Canadians of seeing Dylan Cousins going from Buffalo to Ottawa, you think?
I mean, aside from even more wondering what the hell is going on in Buffalo, I mean, besides that, I think there were some puzzled looks on people's faces in and around the Canadians' kind of entourage about what the hell Buffalo's doing. But yeah, I mean, it definitely strengthens. Well, I don't even know how much it strengthens. It definitely changes the look of. Well, the Senators got better today, right? They did trade out Norris and Bernard Docker, and got Cousins and Gilbert, and a second round pick. That's the part that's just puzzling to me for Buffalo. And also got Zetterlund, who's a good young player. I mean, that was a sneaky good trade for them.
Absolutely.
So they improved. They're at a different place. I think they needed to, even more than the Canadians, they needed to show their market, their fan base. They need to show their captain and some of the other pieces on their team that, it's extremely vital for them to make the playoffs. And so they made the moves that's going to allow them to do that. But they're not short-term moves, right? I mean, they're not, these are not rentals that they brought in. So they objectively got better. So that impacts the Canadians' chances of getting a playoff spot. They have 2 games left against Ottawa of the 20. So it's 10% of their games, but they're going to be 4-point games, and it'll be fun for the Canadians to play 4-point games. But they have to stay in the race long enough. I think there's several games before those games happen, but yeah, it makes their path harder. But there's not too many teams that did a whole lot that made their path harder. They're the only ones, really.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I would have liked the Canadians to make a move for Dylan Cousins. He doesn't tick every box, but I think that he would have been an interesting guy to try. He's more than
the Canadians did not have a Josh Norris to trade,
but that's it.
Yeah.
That's a big issue because Josh Norris, when he's healthy, He's
He's a 30-goal scorer.
he's almost the same. Well, they're different players, but he's the same caliber of player than Dylan Cousins.
Yeah, yeah. His problem's health. He just can't stay healthy, but he's a high end scorer. And so like Buffalo got themselves a good player, but I mean, the the odds are pretty high that Dylan Cousins' career is going to take off and Josh Norris's career is going to start to sink. Unfortunately for him, but that's kind of what happens in Buffalo.
Yeah,
it's unfortunate, but yeah, we'll see how that plays out. Hey, so for Future Friday this week, well, let's go to Future Friday and I'll explain what it is. Future Friday. Future Friday. Okay, so Future Friday this week. I'm gonna be honest, we didn't do. We were so caught up in the trade deadline and everything. We didn't really do a lot of the work that we normally do on it. But the topic of Laval came up with Kent Hughes today, and I thought it was interesting. And we spoke on a previous podcast how it would be interesting for the Canadiens to go out and get some help for Laval and sort of insulate or make it less of a precarious situation where if an injury hits in Montreal, you're eliminating some depth from Laval. To get some depth for Laval might have been something that the Canadiens would consider doing. So Ken Hughes had an interesting point today, mentioning that Oliver Kapanen should be coming over once Tim Russ' season is over in the SHL. So that's help for Laval, and that he would be going to Laval. So that's an interesting development that he is kind of planning around that. We always knew that was a possibility, but the fact that he's actually planning for it means that having that long playoff run will be even more valuable to Laval. We had mentioned a while ago how Mark Crawford was under the impression that Vincenz Rohrer would be going to Laval at the end of the season. But the one issue with that is he could, but the Canadiens would need to sign him to a contract. That's the difference between him and Kapanen, is that Kapanen has a contract and Rohrer doesn't. So the contract situation needs to be settled if they decide to sign Rohrer to a contract, which is no guarantee.
They could not sign him
They could sign him to an AHL deal or an ATO of some sort, but that he'd have to be willing to sign that or whatever. It's not as cut and dry.
Yeah,
but it's possible. It's another possibility, and that would be another kid that you can add in Laval who's, obviously not at the same level as Kapanen, but still someone who's coming off 2 years in a European Pro League and doing pretty well this year, frankly. But otherwise, Owen Beck got papered, Dobesh got papered, no one else did, and so
I honestly that part left me a bit lukewarm, because I understand that you want to empower your young players and be the ones that will make the difference. I understand that there's been a lot of injuries in Laval, and they're slowly coming back. There are some guys that were sent down to Trois-Rivières. The opportunity of bringing Oliver Kapanen too, but it's just if the AHL is a little bit like the mirror of the NHL. In the NHL, you don't want to have a team that's, yes, you want your young players to develop, but you want to have also some veterans around to help them. And I think that it would have been a great development tool and a great help to win some games, to have a veteran that could put up points and help them in their push for the Calder Cup. So the fact that they decided to not go there and say, well, we've got enough guys as it is. I guess I understand the mentality, but I don't fully agree with it.
Well, it's kind of a catch-22 in the sense that the reason they want Laval to go on a long playoff run is so that their young guys can get exposure to that and get some development time. But generally speaking, the Calder Cup final is rarely two teams loaded with young players. It's usually veteran teams with AHL veterans, guys who have played in the league a long time, guys in their 30s. They're teams that aren't brimming with NHL prospects usually. There's maybe a sprinkling of them, but by and large, they're led by AHL veteran players. So you can't want something and then try to get that thing by doing something that doesn't generally work. I mean, it's so yeah. I mean, but there's no. I don't know. I wouldn't have seen the harm of adding, if he was available, even Alex Belzil. That would have been great. Would have been a perfect fit. But I can understand and appreciate. Much like with the parent club, let the group that's gotten you here own it and go about it themselves and nurture that group too, and then really because bringing in Alex Belzil would naturally take ice away from one of their young players. Like that's a fact. Like because he's a scorer, he's a veteran. Well, why would you get him otherwise if you're not going to play him in a prominent role?
Sure. I mean, it wouldn't take a young guy off the off the roster.
But I mean, in terms of roles, he's taking a role from a younger player. Like that's so. I think that's legitimate concern, but you can't say that and say we also hope that Laval goes on a long playoff run. Like you could have used some veteran help to do that.
But that being said, it's a super young team, and they're excellent. And usually that's not the case. They've been struggling year after year to get things going under Jean-François Houle, and this year they took off right from the get-go with Pascal Vincent. And even though they're very young, they've been very consistent. So yeah, I mean it's a group worth trusting that they can do something interesting.
And David Reinbacher's had a big impact there.
Yeah.
Big impact. And that's the one thing that, this is where this whole debate, everything gets muddled, because I would have thought it would have been cool to see David Reinbacher get some games in the NHL, maybe 3 or 4 or something, and with the Montreal in a basically do or die situation where every game is important. They're going for a playoff push. Laval wanting to gear up for a run. Unless Montreal falls out of the race and they can do stuff like that, I just don't see a scenario where it would be fair or make a whole lot of sense to have Reinbacher get that little trial, that little taste of the NHL. So, but the reviews on him in Laval are glowing. Like he's really impressing. He's really impressing with what he's been able to do down there.
Considering the amount of time that he missed, also to come back and look the part right away.
Yeah, he just jumped on the treadmill and started sprinting. It was pretty. So that's been a very encouraging sign. And I think that's the fun part of what's going on with the Canadiens, is that you have this team in Montreal that's trying to make the playoffs for the first time of this rebuild. And you have players in Laval who are trying also to go to the playoffs, but players that you clearly see having a future in Montreal. And I think Reinbacher's at the top of that list right now in terms of the players who are currently in Laval, because I think, Joshua Roy still not guaranteed that he's going to be part of the solution in Montreal. There's a lot of promising players, Florian Jackai, all these guys that have kind of made an impression down there. You don't know. The Canadiens didn't know Emil Heineman would be this guy in the NHL until he actually got a chance to do it. But I think there's the one no-doubter.
He's becoming one of their better forecheckers, Heineman.
One of their better? He is their best forechecker. I don't see anyone who's better than him. Anderson, maybe.
Yeah. But
Heineman has a really mature understanding of angles, of what angles to take on which player based on how they're skating, where they're looking. He's really good at that. But, at the same time last year when he was in Laval, you couldn't look at him and be like, yeah, he's for sure part of the rebuilt Canadians,
Especially not during his call-ups. He was not.
Well, that's it.
He was not convincing during his call-ups. Just circling back to finish with Oliver Kapanen. When I spoke to him, and we did a Future Friday on him some time ago, but he thought that he was having the best of both worlds this year, having gotten the experience to go through a camp in Montreal and earning a spot out of camp, which meant something to him, experienced the NHL for a bit, and then going back to Sweden, where he always thought that he would play that extra year, and this is something that he wanted to do. So he's been able to experience both. So for him, it's great. But Timrå is a middle of the pack team. We don't know how far they can go in the playoffs, but if he was able to come to Laval and be part, in Timrå, he plays like 20 minutes a game.
Yeah.
So
he's a top line player.
Yeah. So he can be an impactful player at the American League level. I think it would be great to immerse him into a gritty type of hockey when the stakes are high at the American League level. And so after the experience of the training camp in Montreal and earning a spot, after being given plenty of good opportunities in Timrå, to top that with a playoff run in the American League, that would be a tremendous season of development for this kid.
It would also be interesting to see how he coexists with Owen Beck on a lineup.
Yeah.
Because that's interesting to me. How are those two guys going to play on the same team? That's kind of like they just seem to be destined for the same chair. And so it'll be interesting to see how Pascal Vincent kind of works that. Obviously the circumstances are different in Laval, but it'd be interesting.
I still don't know the ceiling, the offensive ceiling of Owen Beck. He might.
I don't think the Canadians know that, but I think the Canadians think it's higher than everyone else assumes it to be.
Okay.
It's higher than Jake Evans is.
Yeah.
And so that's everyone kind of assumes that Owen Beck is going to become Jake Evans. Like I think the offense is where he's going to separate from Jake Evans over time, but the offensive ceiling on Oliver Kapanen is even higher than Owen Beck's, because what he did in the SHL at his age this year does not happen all the time. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty rare thing to be a point a game guy, a top line guy in that league at that age. Players his age generally play fourth line minutes. They scratch and claw to get ice. When Emil Heineman was playing in that league, he was a fourth liner. He actually played the exact same role he plays now for the Canadians. He had two veteran guys on his line, and they forechecked the hell out of teams, and they had great metrics, and they had a lot of possession time, and that's what he did.
Yeah.
And when he was Kapanen's age in the SHL, that's what he did. So Kapanen is obviously doing more than that, and is a far more prominent player for Timrå, and so that's encouraging. But I think the offense that he's produced in the SHL suggests that his offensive ceiling in the NHL is considerable.
All right. Well, on that note, thanks for listening to our little rambling today. That was not the most structured and
coherent
episode, yeah. But
we're both going on 3 hours of sleep. Just so you know, we had a very early morning flight. 2 for you, yeah. 3 for me. Obviously, the game against the Oilers, writing after the game. We were each on a 7 a.m. flight this morning to get to Calgary so that we'd be settled for the deadline. And now we're finishing recording at 8:15 Mountain Time. We've each been up for a long time, so on little sleep.
They don't want to know that. All right, everybody. So we'll talk again on Monday. So thanks for checking in, and have a good weekend.